Okay, question from a student. What's my vision for the future, and how do current students, like the ones we have at our summer school and summer camp and so on, fit into that vision? Well, gosh, how will the future be different from the present? I think one feature of human history is technology seems to always advance. What does that even mean? In a sense, what it means is that more things get to be done automatically. We humans imagine doing something, and then more things that we sort of imagine doing can just get done for us automatically by technology than before. Another thing is that technology kind of gets more and more sophisticated in the sense that more and more things we can kind of take for granted. We have, at first, we have the camera, the basic camera, where you have to set everything and it's kind of complicated to use and it has all these different pieces and so on. And then that gradually gets automated to the point where it's just you pick up the camera, you press the kind of idiot button, and it takes a picture, and it's a really good picture, and it's optimized automatically for you, everything that it's doing. As time goes forward, I think we can expect that more and more of technology automates things. I think that there's, in the end, it kind of is shining a big light back on us humans saying, okay, you can do all this stuff. It's all very automatic. What do you want to do? And in a sense, that is a thing that is not a question of technology. That's a question of philosophy, of culture, of things like that. What do you want to do? And so I would say that when people say, well, in the future, all you ever need to know about is technology, I don't think so. I think that, in a sense, technologists like me try and build technology so you have to know less and less about technology. So more and more is automated, and more is just like the human decides what they want to do, and then the technology does it for them. Now, having said that, there's sort of a question of how do you define what you want the technology to do? How do you you have this very sophisticated artificial intelligence or something, how do you communicate with it? How do you tell it what you want? And I've spent a big part of my life sort of trying to understand kind of how do we humans sort of take the things that we think about and move them closer to the kind of way that that one can define them computationally. I mean, a lot of what I've been interested in is this way of thinking that comes from thinking about computers, about systems that operate according to definite rules and so on. This idea of kind of thinking about the world computationally, defining things about the world in computational terms. And one of the things that is for sure a trend over the next decades is that all these different fields of science and other areas of human endeavor, they all are becoming more and more computational. They're all becoming more and more to the point where the way you think about them is in computational terms. You're not just saying, well, I roughly think this is how it works, and I've got words to describe it, but rather, here's this kind of program that represents what's going on. And I think what we will see over the next decades is that more and more areas for any sort of X, there's going to be a computational X. And for the students of today, kind of learning computational language so that you can interact, so that you can think in those computational terms to do computational X, that's obviously a very important thing to do. That's, this computational paradigm is kind of the big thing of the 21st century. And it's something that is kind of the thing for people to learn. It's one of the only new things, fundamentally new areas that has sort of entered the world since public education became common 100 or so years ago. It's like, basic math and reading and writing and so on, those all existed. But thinking about things computationally, that's something new. That's something new of the last few decades. And it's something that is it's a very fertile approach. Like, for example, the mathematical way of thinking about things, that's about 300 years old. And it's something where knowing that way of thinking about things is quite useful. Knowing the kind of computational way of thinking about things is even more useful. So, that's in terms of kind of how to think about things. I mean, like, for example, a lot of education has to do with sort of learning how, have to do with learning how to think about things. Unfortunately, education tends to become rather industrial. And it's like, we've got 1 million students to educate. How are we going to do that? Let's get everybody to take these particular steps kind of on a production line, because that's all we can do, given that we've got 1 million students to educate. And, one can argue whether it's better to sort of educate really well 10,000 students and, the other ones, it's not do so well by them, or whether it's more important to sort of give equal education. I think that's a complicated question. It's a complicated story. People have made different choices at different times in history. People have sometimes meant to make one choice and actually ended up making a quite different choice. I think that my point of view is it tends to be the case that things you want to learn are things you should learn. And things you profoundly don't want to learn, well, it's worth learning some of those things, because at least in my experience, even things I didn't want to learn back when I was a kid, turns out it was quite useful that I know them. But I think that one learns much better if one wants to learn what one is learning, so to speak. And insofar as one can find things one wants to do that are kind of going to be fulfilling to one, and where one can kind of those are the things one really learns the most about, one is going to be much more receptive to learning things. But I think it's, I do tend to think that learning how to think about things, learning how to get things done, how to go from nothing to something, how to sort of have an idea that where you just say, this is a general category of thing you're trying to do, have an idea about it. These are things that are very useful to know. I mean, thinking about things, it's not necessarily a story of how do you get the right answer to the math quiz, because actually you can do that pretty mechanically. It doesn't require kind of the sort of overall thinking about things. I mean, I think the thing that somewhat characterizes sort of this overall thinking is, there may be a particular topic you're studying, but are all those other things also somehow floating around in your mind and able to inform the answers that you get? Or is it just, I'm focused on this one particular thing, and that's the only path I'm going to follow, and I know mechanically how to do that particular thing, but I kind of don't, all these other things I know don't sort of enter. I mean, I'm sort of fond of saying, one of the important things is to not disengage the thinking apparatus, whatever you're thinking about, even if it's something which you might imagine was kind of this very rote mechanical type of thing. I think it's well, there are lots of things about sort of how the world can and should evolve, and how sort of society develops and what people decide is important in society. And there are a lot of very complicated dynamics about which we don't currently have a huge amount of science, a huge amount of predictability. Maybe there's more predictability than we imagine, maybe there's not, about sort of the trends of history and what things people will sort of imagine are a good idea and what things they won't imagine are a good idea. I don't know. I think again, it's like there will always be the unexpected. There'll always be things for which we don't have a sort of predictive theory. And the question is, what do you do under those circumstances? And the more people know how to think about things in the best way, the better that will come out. And I think, what does it mean to think about things in the best way? Well, one thing is know as much as you can. If you say, I only know these few things and I'm going to figure out everything just from these few things, that's not a formula for figuring out things in the best way. So, for example, one example of that is history. There are many things to know from history. History doesn't typically precisely repeat itself. So just knowing this is what happened 200 years ago when such and such the thing came about doesn't necessarily tell you what's going to happen now. But knowing that is tremendously important for getting some idea, some intuition, some way of thinking about what's happening now. And so I think that this sort of idea of, well, the more you know, the more you're going to be able to figure out. This is a pretty useful principle. And even within one's own life, I mean, I'm kind of an ancient person by this point, but, I've had lots of experience with lots of different kinds of things. And when I have to figure something out, a lot of the conclusions I come to will be based on actual experiences that I've had. Oh, yeah, I saw something a bit similar 25 years ago, and this is how that worked out. Let me use that knowledge of what happened before to inform how I think about it now.